So for Arminius, originally the big distinction between him and his Reformed detractors was whether or not grace was resistible. Today, it seems to be, at least if you're a Calvinist, whether or not somebody has the ability to choose God's first. And I think that's in large part due to people not actually reading Arminius. So Arminius talks about God's cooperative and operative grace, or first and second grace. You want to just touch on that a little bit and say, how Arminius uses this to construct a way of salvation for people?
Yeah, so it's what also goes by the name Prevenient grace. And it's not just a Wesleyan, and it's not just an Arminian category or distinction there. The whole point of prevenient grace is simply that God's grace prevenes or comes before any human move toward saving good or toward God. So after the fall, as I said, we're totally unable to do any saving good or seek God on our own. It takes an act of grace. So prevenient grace is operative in that sense that it comes to us, and then God allows us choice. So it's not irresistible. That grace, even at the beginning, can be resisted. If it's resisted, it doesn't mean God's going to give up trying to persuade and lead us to him. But it does mean that we're able to reject God's grace. For those who don't resist, then God gives more grace. And we are at that point, cooperating in this process that is not a simple thing. It's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing relational thing of grace and our reception of it and our being drawn to the divine nature. So, the cooperation itself, again, is enabled by God's grace. So the question is, what is the beginning of faith, or the beginning of that salvation process? With whom does it lie? And Arminius is, unequivocally saying that the beginning of faith lies with God. Faith is a gift. It's one that we must receive if we're going to be saved, but it doesn't originate with us.
So what would Arminius make out of the idea that prevenient grace can be cashed out in terms of a partial regeneration or partial awakening of the soul?
Partial regeneration. Yeah. So that's not a term he uses for sure. And I'm not maybe exactly sure what you mean by partial regeneration. Certainly there are stages on the way to regeneration. So for example, Romans chapter 7, that this person who's struggling with sin is one who already has received enough prevenient grace to know the difference between the good and the evil, and is at least on some level desiring the good, but is not yet regenerate. So he doesn't use the language of partial regeneration, but basically not yet regenerate, but on the way is the point. So if that's what you mean by it, then yeah, he would affirm that. But he would say, rather than partial, there is a point at which a person becomes regenerate, before which they were not justified.
Yeah. No, I think it does, because I think it conceptualizes the sinner as still being a personal, agent, and so capable of having conviction, contrition, and confession of sin. I think that many people who think of partial regeneration, they think of there being one stage leading to repentance or regeneration, which is, you're completely dead, and they mean that as totally unable, and then God awakens you so that you can have some form of spiritual sensibility before you can respond to his faith. And a lot of that is coming from people who've read Roger Olson's book, Arminian Theology, Myths and Realities. And it's sort of along the lines of how he represents prevenient grace as being a partial regeneration.
Okay. Yeah. So understood in that way that I explained, I suppose, yeah, that's consistent with what Arminius thought.